What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Buzz Beat. This is Richie, and I'll be joined by Spencer and Brian today. I'm going to sit back and kind of moderate, not really a debate, but we're going to have some stances that we need to take on somewhat controversial topics where some Hornets fans might view a certain way while others may not. We are going to try this for the first time to kind of have like this back and forth, play some devil's advocate. Brian Spencer, I know the Hornets have not been playing the most inspiring basketball so far. So maybe this format might be, a breath of fresh air. How are you guys liking the style or the format of this episode today?
It's probably fitting for right now with what's going on the court. So no, I think the Hornets community that will listen to this episode will also appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, we could go through the lineup rotations and discuss the pros and cons of playing Ish Smith and Leaky Black together at the same time. But my guess is most people listening know that those are not good basketball lineups, especially as we're about to turn to the calendar year 2024. So yeah, a couple big picture ones. I think like looking forward and looking back, that can kind of give us like a good snapshot of where the roster is and how we got here, and which there's going to be plenty more of that throughout the season, I'm sure. And kind of maybe looking ahead a little bit too with some of the players, signed either through this season or beyond, actually.
Exactly. And I won't put a timer on this by any means, but we'll try to keep these things to 10 to 15 minutes for every single topic. And the first topic that we're going to discuss, and Spencer, I'll let you start off on your stance and how you view this. So the stance or the claim is this: before anyone else on the roster, Terry Rozier should be the top priority, trade priority for the Hornets before they consider anyone else.
I don't think he is the top priority on a piece of paper. I think that's probably Gordon Hayward. But I would say that, and I'll go ahead and make the counter, I guess I suppose why I'm a little torn here. I think Gordon Hayward is the top priority because he's an expiring contract. Problem is his, north of $30 million number that you gotta trade him at. The thing about Rozier is he's got multiple years left on his deal, right? So there's just more value in a potential trade there. I mean, Rozier's under contract until the end of the 25-26 season. And although it's not like a super attractive deal, he's 23 million this year, almost 25 million next year, 26 and a half on his expiring year. That's not a super attractive number, I think, for what he brings. Although that Terry Rozier obviously brings some very serious utility to a competitive team. I think Gordon Hayward's the top priority, but Richie, I would say this. I think Rozier probably brings back the greatest return out of the three most tradable players that the Hornets have right now, being Miles Bridges, Gordon Hayward, and Terry Rozier. So I would put Gordon number one, but I just think I would put Hayward number one, but I do think that Rozier might be the most tradable contract that the Hornets have left on the books here.
Yeah, I unfortunately for our debate format here, Spencer, I think I think I agree with you pretty much completely here. I think the clock's ticking on Hayward. The chance to get anything in return for that before potentially watching another free agent walk out the door for nothing. Again, they only have but 2 months here, less, I guess, 6 weeks basically to try to get something done. So I think there should be a decent amount of urgency for that, especially if you're also trying to like get the Hayward deal in before some like inevitable 15 game injury comes along and just totally tanks any sort of trade value or like what's left of it. And as we discussed on Spencer, you brought this up in the last episode we did together, and it was a great point. Like the Hornets, especially if you're looking at Hayward and Bridges as 2 expiring contracts, plus Rozier's a little different because there's some runway to work with, but like it's going to be a while before the Hornets again have this opportunity to sort of like trade multiple starter level players. And Hayward's very, very good. The number is weird. We can all understand sort of like cap gymnastics that would come along with putting together a type of deal for that. But I get the urgency there. I think if there's a case to be made for Rozier to be the first guy to go, the first guy out the door, perhaps it's just because like you really want to sell high on Rozier right now. That does not strike me as a thing that the front office would, like a theory they would actually be working through. But Rozier is 29 years old, about to turn 30. Turn 30 before the end of the season. 23 games, 7 assists, 53% on twos, 37% on threes. And I mean, look, someone's got to be a playmaker for the Hornets, and without LaMelo, he's getting the lion's share of the opportunities on the ball. And just this morning watching the Toronto film was like, it's just kind of hilarious to see just Charlotte trying any little pick and roll set they have in the book to try to get Terry, a half a crease to get him into the into the paint or get him a shot. Just like pretty unbelievable place to be at in terms of a half court offense. But like that might be it. And then I suppose there's some thought of, if you think Hayward is valuable to have around either for the rest of the season, or if you really like, we're even for some reason kicking the can on bringing him back, I suppose. You think he like matters for like LaMelo and Brandon Miller's development? You think he's a good guy to have around? So that would be the only thought, would be like, it has to be future focused. And so you'd be selling high on Rozier, thinking like, if you get him out of the way, you can clear some opportunities up for Miller at the 2 or for Nick Smith Jr. And then you keep Hayward around, perhaps as like a guy that can help you out long term, or intermediate term if Bridges leaves after the year, and a guy that can just sort of, the way he has done when healthy the last couple of years, be a good player for you, passer, screener, shooter. So a guy that can help some of your young perimeter players develop too, like LaMelo and Miller. So I think that's the argument for it. And Rozier's playing like he's playing well. So again, this would be the opportunity to really like sell high. Like maybe his value is like maxed out trade value wise right now. And if that's the case, then you should be perhaps doing more to sort of like move him at this moment, even if you have more time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're other teams, if you're a competitor, thinking about or calling about Terry Rozier, you're taking on a guy that's under contract for multiple years, as we've talked about, but also like his utility BG, like you can copy and paste those shooting numbers. Like he is what he is now. Like I really don't see those going down. In fact, they could go up because his usage would go down, being on a team that's actually in the hunt for something, right? So he's not going to have to carry the ball handling load elsewhere. So you could imagine, well, maybe the shooting numbers will go up. Whole point of that is you can trade him again if you're a team trading for him now, right? So like it's an asset that you can actually just recycle if for whatever reason, if you decide to pull the plug. So he's definitely the most tradable player on this roster. You brought up the Toronto game 2BG, and it got me thinking like that fourth quarter was like, it was, I almost like, it brought me to tears how much they were hunting him in half court.
Yeah.
Like defensively, it's like, my God, like the Hornets can't hide him anywhere. And that's the one thing, if you are trading for Rozier and you're a team that's like, we actually need this guy in clutch minutes, like it's pretty hopeless.
Yeah, he's got a target on his back
defensively into a pick and roll, because now again, he's carrying a very, very heavy load offensively, usage wise in Charlotte. He won't have to do that elsewhere, but like Rozier, just very little fight on that end. I mean, it was pathetic, kind of that fourth quarter in Toronto.
I mean, it's what happened when they played the Raptors last week too. Yep. They were just like, Scotty Barnes is either going to operate a pick and roll, and he's going to get a switch on a Terry Rozier, or if Malachi Flynn or Dennis Schroeder have the ball, Scotty Barnes is going to go screen for them, then he's going to get the Terry Rozier switch that way. The other night against Toronto was also Ish Smith and Nick Smith. Like, I mean, Scotty Barnes was just doing whatever he wanted against Charlotte's small guards. There were times where multiple guys like that were out on the court, and like Toronto could have just like had their pick with whomever they wanted to go after. It's one of the reasons why I'm so surprised Charlotte managed to win the other week when Toronto actually like came back by running the Flynn Barnes or Schroeder Barnes pick and roll so well. Terry will have a target on his back no matter what. His point of attack defense has been terrible. I mean, his fight has not been necessarily great on that end, sort of like playing without the ball, screen navigation, chasing guys off screens when he's in off-ball actions. The thought, I guess, would be if he moves to another team, a contender, usage goes down, playing time's gonna go down, and the usage will probably be like sort of like less difficult pick and roll isolation stuff, which he's having to do a lot of now quite well. Like he's been very efficient in isolation and in the pick and roll so far this season. Like the synergy numbers for him are quite promising. But I think if you put him on a contender, you like the fact that he can give you some of that, but ultimately you're going to use him as like a spot up, movement, triple handoff guy, not like the sort of like, I mean, there's basically, this is the only situation I could think of in the NBA right now where Rozier would have the role that he has at the moment. It's just the complete lack of other ball handlers on the roster.
Yeah, the teams that I've kind of circled for Rozier, I mean, how many more trades can we do with the Clippers? But I do think that the Clippers could really use him. I have, funny enough, Toronto could probably use him.
Yeah, they could.
As much as any team in the league. But that's kind of contingent on them getting this thing going, which there are very little signs of that happening right now. I thought about Orlando.
Yeah.
I think that they could use just a little extra shooting, and he could play six man there.
Mm-hmm.
Like he could take those Anthony Black minutes in clutch in the playoffs. Or not necessarily the minutes. Those, like, we need 2 offensive possessions of quality shot basketball, and maybe Anthony Black just has to leave the floor and we put Terry.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there is definitely a case, BG, that we could get to the trade deadline and be surprised at the return that Terry Rozier got, because those games are close. And when you really boil it down all the way down to its true component, like, it comes down to 1 or 2 possessions, and there's not a lot of guys in the league. You're asking for a good offense possession if the play breaks down, or he's your second option. Like, Terry Rozier's going to get his own shot, and he's really good at those tough shots.
Yeah.
And that stuff really matters when things get
tight. The fact that he can shoot threes is like in difficult threes on high volume, and shoot every kind of three, pull up,
off the bounce,
off the isolation, step back. I mean, flare screens, pin downs. Like he's got it all. I do like the thought of, like, a couple of years ago, Spencer, you had a great proposal that I really liked, which was when Luke Kennard was still with the Clippers before he was traded to Memphis, and it was like a deal, a Clippers Hornets deal centered around Rozier and Kennard. That was, like, at the time, I remember thinking that was a beauty of a hypothetical trade. And yeah, with like the Clippers and the Magic, it's like if Rozier's there, there's like a lot of like size length around him to sort of like help make up for some of the perhaps defensive limitations.
You can scram him out on those
exactly.
teams, right?
Like,
you can
easily. And who knows, maybe like Philadelphia, like, it's probably like Rozier, Maxi's just probably not tenable as like a defensive backcourt, but like they're another team that, like, I mean, they could probably use another. Yeah, I don't think Rozier is the kind of player they're looking for, but they could use another ball handler. They could use another guy to like get his own shot, and maybe there's something there, but I don't believe so.
I know I'm just the moderator, but I feel like I would be on the other side of this debate in terms of, I think you guys are both in agreement that Terry Rozier should not be the top trade priority. I think that Hayward, obviously you don't want to lose him for nothing, but I think a lot of people want him off the roster, and that just kind of happens naturally at the end of the season. And to your point, Spencer, Terry Rozier would bring back the most out of anybody on this roster, not named the untouchables, but like of the trade targets. I think that's why I would lean this way.
So here's the last thing on this Hayward kind of Rozier debate on who's the top priority trade-wise. And I thought about this a lot in the last week. I think the reason trade deadlines are getting quieter and quieter is because agents really kind of force their way into front offices, and bird rights are super strong, right? They're obviously by true purpose, supposed to be strong so you can re-sign your guys. But I think what plays out a lot of times is why you don't see the trades on expiring contracts for either mediocre players, role players, which I would say Hayward is at this point, or star players, is because the team controls their bird right. So the sign and trade is such a strong tool. The player gets the amount of years, the amount of money they want, and the team gets things back. Right. So like the trade deadline has almost, it's, I think slowly, like I'm kind of surprised this didn't come up in the CBA more. Like the trade deadline kind of happens in the summer now, with all these sign and trades. And that's because of bird rights. It's because players get the max amount of years they want and max amount of money they want because of the definition of bird rights is, and the team's still able to extract assets. So not to say that will happen with Hayward, because he's not going to get paid, obviously, what Charlotte gave him on this past deal, but he can get maximum amount of years if there's a team out there in the market that would give it to him. So anyways, I've thought a lot about that, and it's kind of a tangent, off-topic thing here, but I was surprised that did not come up from an ownership perspective in the CBA. And maybe it's just because all parties like this, right?
Yeah.
But the agents have really, really overplayed their power in that sense to me.
Yeah, it works out for both teams. In the
right.
Yeah. So, all right. Statement number 2. This is more of a pessimistic statement, and I actually will throw it to Brian because Brian, I can see you going both ways on this. JT Thor will be out of the NBA by 2025 when his contract is up with Charlotte. Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, I don't think so. 2025 is coming up pretty soon, and I know we're at the we're halfway through or almost halfway through year 3, and unfortunately, it does seem like JT's had a bit of a step back this year. He played, I think, nice in spot duty as a rookie, and I thought the final 6 weeks of last season, he was like a big part of Charlotte's like improved half-court defense and transition defense, with what he was able to do around the rim, getting back, hustling back, using his length, being the low man to sort of like, help her to put out fires around the floor. And I thought he and Mark Williams, along with Dennis Smith Jr., were like integral in and probably some shooting luck too. Were sort of like integral in the Hornets being a top 7-8 defense or whatever the last, March and April of last season. So he didn't play great at Summer League, which was concerning. And he's looked really rough this season. Just 30% on catch and shoot threes. I think he's in the low 30s in terms of percentage on corner threes, 28%, non-corner threes, 29%. Shooting poorly basically from every level of the court. He has just 5 free throw attempts on the season. So like none of that's good for a guy who's approaching, 100 career NBA games plus some G League stuff. So it's not like there's zero experience to go on. But I do think JT Thor will still be in the NBA in a couple of years. He's still just 21. I know it's like a little hard to believe, but he's really, really young. This is a guy who came out basically a year early from Auburn. That was like, we talked about this a lot during the 2021 draft cycle. Like the argument for Thor was he was a pre-draft player, that it was going to take him a year to come in, learn a system, get stronger, develop, in that you'd have a guy that could be worth a 2022 first round pick, but you would have gotten him on a team controlled second round pick deal. So I don't know, at this point, maybe the first year is a bit of a wash. And then just the team has been so bad. Like I think you could argue that the context has been really unfavorable for a guy like Thor, especially for someone who's trying to play off the ball and needs to be, sort of set up and spoon fed to kind of get him going. But he's missing a lot of he's missing a ton of open shots too. But the team's just been a mess on defense most of the time, and I don't think that's Thor's fault. And I just think it sort of makes it tougher for him to sort of like stand out as an impact guy, because he's the team defender, not just like a lockdown one-on-one guy. But I think with his length, I think with a shot that enough NBA personnel types can look at and say, I see something there, I think we can turn this guy into a 35% 3-point shooter. and then what he does from a versatility standpoint, getting on the offensive glass, being a team defender, being able to switch and guard a few different guys. I think there's going to be I think there's going to be at least one more team that takes a chance on JT if he does end up outside of Charlotte, and that puts him in the NBA beyond, into 2025. So I think Thor sticks around. I'm still hopeful that he can like carve out a role. I liked him a lot as a prospect. That some of the flashes have been okay. And yeah, I just kind of wonder like what would have happened if he ended up in Oklahoma City or Orlando. Or Orlando seems like a team that would love to take a like second draft JT Thor. Like he just really does feel like a Jeff Weltman type player. So and yeah, I mean the 2020 draft was a mess for the Hornets. Thor has like clearly been the best player out of that draft so far, which maybe not saying much. So yeah, it's not great. That being the draft that follows LaMelo is sort of like one of the reasons why the Hornets are where they are at the moment. So no, I think Thor is in the league beyond 2025. Spencer, what say you?
Yeah, no, I agree, and we're supposed to not be agreeing this year, but no, I do agree with you. Now, I had to think about this one really hard, though. My thing with JT is, and you touched on all this, so I don't need to go into detail, but he is a good team defender. He is an attention to detail kind of guy. It jumps off when you watch live. He's almost like a 3.5 to me defensively, which is really a bummer because he's got incredible length. He's got slightly above average athleticism, I would say, but he can't hold up even against fours in the NBA, which I think is really, really holding him back. I think the idea of JT is that maybe you could certainly if he unlocked his outside shot, that you could play small ball 5 lineups with him, right? Like, and I don't even, you barely play him at 4. And I think that at least in my opinion, like just watching it, on TV, and that's a big problem for him. And why I do think there is a chance he's not in the NBA in 2025. Obviously offensively, he has got to knock down corner threes. He's got to. Like that has got to come around for him to have any kind of real utility that you can circle and say, this is here. We know this is here. We can count on this. JT just kind of has nothing that you can quite count on right now. It's still like the idea of a lot of things. And BG, I mean, you said it, he's 21, which is a good reminder because I forget that. I feel like, honestly, I didn't know how old JT was. You could have told me he was 24 years old and, we drafted him. But, I know he was a one and done at Auburn, right? And so, the idea of him, like a lot of guys in the NBA, is fun to think about. But we've seen very, 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 very little evidence so far. I would like to see the Hornets try some stuff with him, though. Like, he's not an incompetent passer, and he can put the ball on the floor a little bit. Like some inverted pick and rolls or something. As the season goes on, the Hornets lose more and more games. Like, just to test with him and see if this guy got like 2 to 3 dribbles with a guard that the defense has to respect from beyond the arc. Like, if he got a runway, can he be a playmaker, at 6'10", 6'11", but just because he can see over the top of the defense, just those kind of things I think would reveal more about his basketball acumen, IQ, but we just haven't seen that. Like, offensively, BG, he just kind of stands there.
It's pure catch and shoot or like corner crash.
Yeah.
That's really it. He doesn't even really get to be used as like a screener all that much.
No, he stands in the corner. Like, to know what you have to be like a little bit creative, especially if he's going to be in your rotation. And look, we can beat this drum all we want. We know that's not Clifford's specialty.
Dude, I'm worried. As a
be creative and test some stuff.
As a sidebar, we've texted about this on the BuzzBeat group thread. I'm a little worried about Cliff at the moment. Like
his health.
Like,
my guess.
Are you hearing
I just like this can't be like I mean, he probably had to have some idea of what he was signing up for, but like the lineups he's having to play, being this bad defensively. I mean, the Hornets broadcast has caught him twice in the last like week and a half, just screaming at Nick Richards to set the effing screen. Like, and if you keep an eye on Cliff, this will happen. I mean, this probably happens to a lot of NBA coaches, but just there's probably a handful of times per game where like the Hornets will botch some after timeout set, and the camera will catch Cliff on the sideline, just like putting his head in his hands or throwing his hands up or whatever. Just I'm a little. I mean, like I'm assuming he's in good mental health, and certainly he is well compensated for his efforts here. And the guy loves basketball, so like it probably can only be but so bad. But just to see this team be so bad defensively, bad with its habits, has got to be kind of driving him a little mad at the moment. But yeah, I think I think especially if the Hornets are able to move a couple of the veterans that we've talked about, Hayward, Bridges, Rozier, etc., that like hopefully it does open up some. I mean, probably won't be pretty, but you might as well see what you have. But it opens up some lab league stuff with guys like Thor and Nick Smith and that type of like basketball sort of trial stuff, because the Hornets have a 1.9 team option on Thor for next season, and you probably want to see what you have aside from just having him spot up in the corner. He can do like fifth option stuff. He just needs to be able to like shoot 30 whatever % on corner threes. And I don't think his shot is broken by any means. But yeah, what else is there? Because part of the package with Thor as a prospect was he was versatile with the basketball, that he wasn't just a catch and shoot guy. He could do some creative stuff attacking closeouts or in scramble situations. And the thought was, well, what does that mean for him going forward? Like, can he play with the ball in his hands and be like a little bit more than just a play finisher? So who knows? The back half of the season could be an opportunity to explore that.
Well, and the last thing on Thor I would say before we move on is, he could be a sweetener in a deal. Just like you do have a team option. It's a super, it's very inexpensive, next season if you do pick it up. And I guarantee you there's teams and scouts out there that look at this guy and like, no, we can do something with this. Yep. We can fix this. Our system can tap into more of what he can do. So, it just as we kind of talk about trades, he's a guy Charlotte should at least kick the can on that and be like, well, what if we put JT in here? What does that do for you?
Yeah.
So anyways.
Yeah. Again, top, 35, 40 draft pick, not that long ago, played in the SEC. Like, there's still plenty of people that evaluated this guy, scouts, personnel people that evaluated JT Thor 3 drafts ago that have a positive grade on him and are just thinking, well, if we could have gotten this guy in our system, we could have turned him into a rotation player. He'd be on his way to being a rotation player. So I just, again, the length and the movement lead me to believe that he's going to get, a second contract somewhere else. So we'll see how that goes, I guess.
All right. The third statement that we are going to hash out is the Hornets, like looking back on it, should have never acquired Gordon Hayward back in 2020. Looking at the positives, the negatives, and how it's panned out, what do you guys say to that?
I think it's easy to say. I think it's really, really easy to say, yes, the Hornets should not have done this. And so to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure where I stand on this. It's really a hard one, I think, or at least to me it is. But I'm going to take the stance of, no, that's not true. The Hornets actually should have done this. Number one is, Hayward was brought here to help LaMelo Ball, okay, to bring him along the right way and to give him a bridge from a playmaking, ball handling, just pure usage standpoint, to give him to give him a partner. So that idea makes a lot of sense to me. And number two is, this is a small market. Charlotte had just drafted who was going to be the center of their franchise, the billboard player. and they also had cap space that offseason. And look, it's a small market. You got to overpay. And did they pay too much? They absolutely did. That's not debatable. Like nobody would disagree on that. But I think the idea and looking out over a number of years and how their cap was going to grow. Now, of course, Miles Bridges and his situation kind of changed that a little bit. That's where, and I think we talked about this a lot, in past years is like, oh man, in 2023, 2024, like Charlotte's going to be in trouble. And then going into that next season, because if this Hayward thing works out, then they got to pay they're going to have to pay LaMelo, and then they're going to have to pay Miles. Like we were looking at the team construct a little differently, but I just think from a pure, like, let's make sure we put the right kind of tools around the guy, LaMelo Ball, who we know is going to be the centerpiece of our franchise. I think the thought process was correct. And as I said, you had to overpay to do it. It's the only way you're going to do it in a small market like Charlotte that doesn't already have some kind of winning culture to hang your hat on, right? So I'm actually going to defend it. I don't. Yeah, I'm going to defend it. I liked it at the time, and I know it's easy to say that it wasn't the right thing to do now because everybody has 2020 vision in retrospect. But I think the thought process was it's very defensible.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember what we said the day of the podcast we recorded. I can remember what I said, which is that I wouldn't have pursued it. This is not like what I would have done. It was obviously an overpay. And at the same point in time, though, I could understand why they were doing it. One, to get good basketball players. To get good basketball players, and they did that. Gordon Hayward is a good basketball player. When he's been healthy, he's been very good. And on top of that, he and LaMelo, it's worked. Like it's still, even early this season when they were getting to play together some, watching Gordon Hayward screen for LaMelo Ball and get a switch and go into the post and LaMelo bend the defense and then throw it to Hayward. Like it was like, God, the vision is still there actually. I think my issue with it is that it sped up the timeline for LaMelo. And we understand why it did that. And we understand exactly who pushed the button to make sure that they would do that. It was the former owner, Michael Jordan. It was his decision to do all of these things.
And we still were not able to hang the banner for the 8th
yes.
seed. We still couldn't even do that.
Yeah, still couldn't do it. But like in theory, this team, when they had all of their pieces, they were a borderline playoff play-in team, top 6 offense in the 21-22 season. And it is important to note, like, at no point in time really did like the Gordon Hayward salary like obstruct Charlotte's team building. They botched the team building by themselves. like they were the ones who tanked the 2021 draft and who had 2 top 15 picks in 2022 and came away with only Mark Williams. And then Miles Bridges did something criminal. like it was like none of that was like had anything to do with Gordon Hayward taking up, 30 whatever $million per year on the Hornets cap space or cap sheet. So I think I've kind of like gotten to the point on it now too, where it's like, I wouldn't have done it. At the same point in time, I understood the benefits of it from a LaMelo development standpoint and from Charlotte trying to become semi-competitive. And it should be noted, like they still may get something out of it. Like at the end of the day, they may actually they might move Gordon Hayward and get a real thing before the trade deadline this year. I mean,
I think it's gonna be hard, but
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You're gonna have to boil it down to like 2 or 3
yeah,
teams.
right. We talked about this on the pod last week, like why moving Hayward would be tough, but like you still may end up getting something for the contract. And Spencer, you mentioned this at the time of the transaction. Like the only or one of the real like true gripes with it was that it was clearly something that the Hornets and Celtics like had not been prepared for like days before it happened, because the Hornets
Right.
had to eventually had to stretch Nick Batum. It turned into a whole other transaction. Like Boston was kind of caught unprepared for it. So that was the one thing, was that it was a little irrational, and it sped up the LaMelo team build timeline. But ultimately, like, I think it's proven to be like a positive contract. Like maybe I'm wrong. It's probably easy to push back on that, but like, what else was Charlotte going to do with the cap space? Like seriously, like what else was this team, this ownership, this front office going to do with the cap space? Like they turned it into a good player that fit next to their best young player. Like it's fine. Wasn't good. They've not made the playoffs with those guys, but like I think ultimately like ended up being a mostly fine contract, and like he's still playing good basketball well into his 30s. So I think if anything, I'm kind of like flipping around on this and like moving from the like, I don't think this was a good idea, I wouldn't have done this, I understand why they did it, to maybe like slightly more positive than that over the course of the contract.
My guess would be the number one thing that MJ just, again, this anecdotal, I'm just guessing, but like the number one thing he did was just ignore Gordon's health history and just say, which he liked to do and probably still likes to do, gamble. Like if Gordon Hayward would have played 70 games a year since he's been in Charlotte, this would be we'd be talking about re-signing him.
Yeah. They probably would have made the playoffs like one of the 2 years, in 21 or 22, I think with like
but we'd be talking about retaining the asset. Rather.
Yeah.
Like not like, oh, Gordon Hayward's taking us to the Eastern Conference, finals or anything like that. But we'd be talking about retaining the asset, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, because you're right, Brian, when he's on the floor, the positive influence he has on the team, certainly offensively, is very obvious. I mean, it's there, and he does have trade value. It's going to be hard, and we're going to talk about that, more on episodes as we get closer to the trade deadline. But anyways, this is a fascinating conversation to me, because I think in the moment that it happened, there was a very obvious, okay, I get this, and I also see why this is idiotic. And as we talk about this right this very moment, it's exactly the same conversation, right? Like, so but anyways, to put a bow on it, I would defend it. Wasn't my favorite acquisition of all time, but I get what the Hornets were trying to do. And again, as a small market, I don't blame them for that.
All right. Well, that one probably had the most dissension between you two, even though you kind of settled a little bit in the same area. But of the three, that was probably the one you guys had the most disagreement on. We're going to finish it with this one. And I don't want our listeners to take this the wrong way. This is not an indictment, a total indictment on LaMelo Ball. But the statement is this: the Hornets cannot win a playoff series with LaMelo Ball as their quote unquote number one option.
I don't know. Number one option. Like what? Like sometimes I wonder what this stuff means. Like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Like Jason Tatum's the number one option. But like, here's how I would answer this. I want to see LaMelo be less heliocentric as time moves forward. I don't think that he can be the number one option on any team. Charlotte, doesn't matter what the team is, as like a Luka Doncic heliocentric, 33, 34 usage percentage kind of player. I don't, in my personal opinion, and I'm not even sure I'm allowed to talk about LaMelo anymore, but we're going to do it here. I don't think he's the kind of player that's going to be successful in the NBA playing a heliocentric system. He's got off-ball capabilities. He's a good cutter. He's a good movement shooter. We've seen this, but I think it's in LaMelo's DNA to play basketball with the ball in his hands constantly. But I don't think that's the path to him being as successful as he can be and maximizing his potential. So one of the things I want to get into here, BG, because I'm going to turn to you in a second, but one of the things I do want to talk about is how do the Hornets build around him moving forward? Because we're going to have a different GM. We're going to we're going to have a different head coach as well. How do we build this team around him moving forward to give him the capability to tap into some of those things? Because he's very effective offensively, playing with the ball in his hands, but I don't think that's maximizing his potential as a player. And I don't expect LaMelo to realize that now yet either. He's very young. But that's my real rub with him. I don't think he's made since the year he made the All-Star team. I don't think he's made strides in trying to grow as an overall player. And he hasn't been surrounded and given the resources to do that. So maybe it's not fair for me to put that onus on him, but as he's currently constructed as a player and how he plays, no, I don't think that he can be a number one option. But I think that if he were to grow as a player and tap into different things, then whatever quote unquote number one option means, yeah, I think the Hornets can win a playoff series with him being the kind of the head guy, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think you and I are going to end up like with opposite answers, but in a similar location, Spencer, which is like, I'll say false to this. Like, I do think the Hornets or some other team can win a playoff series with LaMelo Ball as the number one guy, the most expensive player, the guy who has the ball the longest, or the highest combined usage and assist rate. But I am absolutely in agreement that like pure heliocentric basketball is like not the look for LaMelo. We've talked about that plenty of times on the podcast, and I will always harken back to like LaMelo's rookie year when he got to play with Malik Monk, Devontae Graham, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges. I mean, the Hornets had so many different guys that could handle the ball. And I actually thought that's, for whatever it's worth, I thought that's when LaMelo's passing was like at its best. Like honestly,
Totally agree.
The hit-ahead passes, the connective passes, the weird scramble situation passes. I think he's made growth as a pick and roll player. Like we've seen him make more of an effort in the small sample this season to get downhill, try to get to the rim. The finishing still wasn't there, but I do think he's shown a little bit more patience. He's done some more of the Zach Lowe has talked about this. We've probably mentioned it too, just like the Steve Halliburton does this, but the Steve Nash style, like as opposed to trying to like, if you're dribbling on the right side of the basket, as opposed to trying to like lay it up, dribble through to the other side. Then
use the rim as a defender.
Exactly. Look for a passing, kick out or a cut or a dive or maybe you got a reverse layup there. I think he's mixed some of that in. I wish he would do a lot more of it. But I just see 6'7" with that passing vision and that shooting touch, and like we can gripe about the shot selection. Like that is like kind of an issue at times, but he's an amazing free throw shooter, which I think matters. I think it matters for postseason stuff too. He's a good 3-point shooter. He can get off the ball. And he can do some stuff in the pick and roll. And I think he's a team that opponents do have to game plan for. And if you have a guy like that, I'm not saying like this guy can be the best player on a championship team right now, but win a playoff series, like, I do think that. And it's also, I think, worth noting that like, maybe seemingly low hanging fruit isn't always that low, but like LaMelo doesn't actually turn the ball over that much. Like his sort of like,
because he gets a lot of shots to the rim.
That's part of it. But it's like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, if he could just tone down some of the like, there's probably like 3-pointers he takes per game that if you just pulled that out, like he would instantly become like at least a marginally better basketball player, like right away, just by saying those 4, 5 shots that come early in the shot clock and they're a fadeaway 3 from 27 feet. Like I'm just not taking that anymore. I'm going to drive the ball. I'm going to move it, whatever. We should talk a lot more about like what a hypothetical team build around LaMelo looks like. But I think it's important to remember that like there's a gap between like heliocentric Luka Doncic basketball and like a number one option, right? Like there's a delta between those two things. And I think like
Right.
in that area is like where you'll find like the role for potentially the role for LaMelo. But as far as like building a team around him, like I think Charlotte's identified some of the right stuff. It took them a couple of years, but they got Mark Williams. I think you want a defensive first wing that can shoot and guard the ball. Took them a couple of years. They got Brandon Miller. I think the other thing you would really want would be like another ball handler that can like really pressure the rim. And that's ultimately why like the Rozier LaMelo backcourt always had an expiration date on it for me. Like defensively, it's not really viable, and neither one of those guys really can heat up the rim. It's why like the LaMelo Bridges combination like seemingly had like some real upside before Miles Bridges did some horrendous things. So I don't know, like, but I think that's the backbones of it. It's like you find shooting, you find two other wings that can defend the ball, and you give them a lob threat at center, and hopefully one of those wings can shoot and or like get to the rim. And I think like that's the recipe. And I think it's nice that Charlotte has some of that stuff. It's just like, how do you finding the number two guy is like really, really difficult. And maybe that's Miller, but maybe that's not. And so they're gonna have to find another way to try to like improve the roster at an important spot.
Yeah. And you know, they have time. You know, they have time to do it. I mean, LaMelo is under contract until the end of the 2029 season. So likely this is going to have to be through trade. The number one, I mean, you laid it out perfectly, BG. The number one thing I would like to see Charlotte prioritize with LaMelo Ball and his ability, specifically offensively, is right now, I would say he plays with the ball in his hands, or just in general, with an advantage. An advantage. In other words, the defense is somewhat compromised on some part of the floor, with an advantage, probably 5 to 10% of the time. And that's probably being kind. Can we move that needle to 25, 20, 25%? LaMelo Ball is one of the smartest passers or just readers of the floor in the NBA, but he is so disadvantaged and incentivized to play this carnival style of basketball, because of the way this roster is built, and he's developing bad habits. I think that's kind of in his DNA too. That's always been one of my frustrations with him. If you allow him to play that way, he will play that way. And so what I really want Charlotte to prioritize is, can we find someone that is a smart player, that is going to make the right plays, is going to take some of the ball handling duties off of him, is going to be a positive shooter, creator of offense, and allow him to
re-sign Gordon Hayward.
Re-sign
Gordon Hayward. Like all the things you're just mentioning is it's just like
70 games of Gordon Hayward, right? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Well, yeah. So, anyways, we can talk more about all this, but I maybe let's bookmark this, Richie. Like, how do the Hornets, like, this season's over, right?
Oh my God!
How do the Hornets?
It's toast.
How do the Hornets move forward? And they need to think about this with their GM hire. I mean, the name, and I know we got to get out of here quickly. The name I always come back to, and I wouldn't even. I don't want Mitch Kupchak to do this, but like a DeJounte Murray.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of player that, and we don't have the infrastructure in place right now to make a move like that. But I don't think it'd be crazy for Charlotte, theoretically, to make a trade like that now. A guy under contract. LaMelo just signed his new, kind of like Atlanta did, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly the kind of trade they made with trade, but we can't just keep kicking the can down the road every year with LaMelo and say, well, next year we'll get the guy through the draft or V-trade. Like, I think it's time for them to go out and be creative and make a move. And that's why I keep hammering home this idea of like, let's move off Mitch Kupchak now. Let's not wait till the end of the season. Let's do this now. We got 2 expiring contracts. Terry Rozier, another, asset that I think we can move now. But All right, I'll stop there. I know we got to go.
Yeah, creativity and Mitch Kupchak don't seem to go together.
They shouldn't be in the same
Yeah.
sentence. Yeah.
But I would not be surprised, Spencer, what you're suggesting could happen. Like, maybe it happens prior to the summer. Get the ball rolling on that. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you guys tuning in. I was hoping that this episode would produce more like of a screaming match between you two, but it's civil, very civil. If you guys like what we do, please support us by giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So for Spencer, for Brian, I am Richie. We'll talk to you guys soon. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year. And we're out.